So, executive function, what is it? Disclaimer: executive function is complex. There are many researchers in the field, and they all have slightly different definitions of executive function and different modes of talking about it. I'm going to get into a formal definition later, but first, I'd like to start with some visuals and analogies to get us thinking about this concept. So, the first is thinking of executive function as the musical conductor of the brain. I think this can be a really powerful image when thinking of executive function. This comes from Thomas Brown, um, who, you know, I kind of think is one of the grandfathers of talking about executive function in a really manageable, understandable way for people. I'm just going to use his direct quote because I think he writes about it really well. He says that executive function, regardless of their expertise, the musicians need a competent conductor who will select the piece to play, make sure they start playing at the same time and stay on tempo, fade in the strings and then bring in the brass, and manage them as they interpret the music. Without an effective conductor, the symphony will not produce good music. I really like to imagine this because I can see that conductor at the front of the orchestra, and he's like, "More strings, I'm not hearing you. You need to slow down and go fast." And that's how he or she, that conductor role, really coordinates that smooth, coherent sound that's able to come through the orchestra when they're trying to play a piece. And there's a lot happening and a lot that needs to happen for that to successfully be executed. Another way to think about this comes from Harvard Center on the Developing Child, which I'm going to bring up a few times in this presentation. They have some really great resources on executive function. And they compare EF to an air traffic control system. Um, I think this is a really relevant image because it ties in space and time and communication that are all important factors at an airport and also are really important when we're thinking about how we want to execute our own goals. We need to have an awareness of our own space, the time component going into, we need to be able to communicate our needs as we are going through whatever it is our task is. And I often like to think of that moment, maybe you've experienced it too, when you're in a plane and you're about to land and you're so excited to get home or to get to your destination, and the pilot comes on and says, they're not quite ready for us yet. So we're going to have to circle the airways a little bit longer. Everyone kind of like collectively sighs. But thank goodness that bird's eye view of the controller exists because it's essential for the safe landing and taking off of planes. And then lastly, both of these images, one of which is the Rubik's Cube of the brain, and the other is this distinguishing between the forest and the trees. Those both come from Lynn Meltzer, um, who is local and also has excellent resources on executive function. She founded Research LD and runs a whole conference on EF. I recommend her work. She she puts the Rubik's Cube out there, which I like as a visual to sort of go against this idea of the mini me and the brain, and instead to show that these are really coordinated processes that are happening in our brain. And when you kind of move or interact with any of them, like a Rubik's Cube, you're impacting all of the others. So, you are constantly having to impact how you are shifting flexibly and your goal setting, and you have to prioritize in order to do that. So she shows through that image, I think, how interrelated all of these skills really are. And then she also talks about the forest and the trees, which I just really like as a visual for thinking about cognitive flexibility, which we're going to talk about, which is a huge component of executive function. And in that way, she thinks about, if you're standing at the bottom of a mountain and you're looking around you, you're going to see the tree in front of you and the leaves on that tree and the bark on that tree. But you're not really going to get a sense of the whole forest unless you're at the top of the mountain. And then you look out and you're seeing the entire forest and the valleys and the other mountains in the distance and the clouds in the sky. So you're able to see that big picture in a whole different way. And one aspect of executive function is that cognitive flexibility, being able to shift between that big picture and hone in on the details that you need at any given moment. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So now let's get into an actual definition. There is no one definition. Like I said, researchers kind of define it in different ways, so they're all very similar. and it's not a diagnosis in the DSM-5, which I think is important to note. So at Landmark, our working definition, which comes from Patricia Newhall, is that executive function is the brain's ability to coordinate the cognitive and psychological processes needed to initiate, sustain, monitor, and adapt the behaviors and attitudes required to achieve a goal. I will say, like many of the definitions out there, it's a bit of a mouthful, so let's break it down a little bit. So I've kind of highlighted some of the keywords I really like and that I think are essential when thinking about executive function. The first is coordinate. That idea, like the Rubik's Cube, of systems sort of working together. And we have to coordinate all of them working together to really be effective in when we're trying to complete a task. Um, then thinking about how it's both the cognitive and psychological processes. So that's important because there's a lot, we know it's tied to our thinking and learning, and importantly, it's also tied to emotion, executive function, which we'll talk about as well. We have to be able to initiate, get started on a task. That's something I really see college students, for example, struggling with when tasks become more complex and there's more independence involved. That task initiation gets really challenging, but is still obviously really important. Then you have to sustain, you have to self regulate your attention, your motivation, and your effort throughout that task. You have to monitor, bring self awareness to the process to monitor our own actions. Then you have to adapt. That's where that flexibility comes in and be flexible to shift gears as needed. And then all of that is catered toward our behaviors, how we act, how we respond to our environment, and our attitudes, our own opinions or beliefs. And here's where emotion comes in again. So all of that really needs to execute together to achieve a goal. And goals, when we're thinking of executive function, can be something larger, like a college thesis, but they can also be really small, like getting out of the house on time to avoid being tardy to school. That's a goal that involves a lot of executive function. So, all of this is to say, in other words, executive function helps us engage in goal directed behavior to get stuff done. Just to throw another definition out there, this definition comes from Sabine Doebel, who has a great TED talk I recommend. It's here on the slide called "How Your Brain's Executive Function Works and How to Improve It." I think her definition is a little simpler, and I liked that about it. She says that executive function is our amazing ability to consciously control our thoughts, emotions, and actions in order to achieve goals. So if you're looking for one that's maybe a little more succinct, I think that could be one to throw to be able to use and throw out there. I also really like to reference Sabine Doebel because one of the analogies she uses that I love is comparing it to driving. And so when you think about driving, something that a lot of adults do pretty routinely, and so don't think about as much. But when you think back to when you were first learning to drive, or maybe if you think of students or your own children who might be learning to drive, how much thinking has to go into it when they're in that stage? Or maybe when you, who are a comfortable driver, are thrown into a stressful driving situation, like being in the middle of a big city and having to follow directions and get somewhere on time while navigating the traffic, or driving in a sort of new environment like a country that cars drive on the other side of the road. All of those are examples of times where our executive functions are being more taxed, and therefore we notice them a little bit more. We're aware of how we're paying attention. We're trying to hold in our memory what the rules are if we're learning, or what the directions are if we're trying to follow them. We really notice the executive function that we're using because it's a novel or stressful task. So I think that's a really great way to think about it too, because when we think about executive function, we're using it all the time, but we might not notice it when it's kind of naturally occurring. But we do tend to notice it when we're thrown into situations that are new or stressful. And that is a lot of the time the case for our students.